Thank you, everybody, for coming along on what I'm sure is a busy afternoon here in Monte Carlo for all of us. I really appreciate you making time for this session. My name's Steve Lathrope from ISI, along with my colleague Rupert Bidwell, also from ISI. We've lured you into this room in order to spend a little bit of time talking about the applications and the opportunities presented by the use of the ever-maturing, ever-accelerating new space sector, combined with some other technologies. The opportunities that these technologies offer to the insurance industry in its broadest sense, to insurers, MGAs, reinsurers and brokers, particularly focusing on natural catastrophe applications, and particularly focusing on hurricane and on earthquake. I'm going to get us started by trying within maybe 2 minutes to cover a couple of decades worth of technological advances in space, and then look at the way in which those new technologies are throwing off enormous amounts of near real-time data that is of huge value if harnessed and applied in the right way. It's not just about the technology that's whizzing around above us. It's also about the combination of that space technology with almost ubiquitous artificial intelligence, machine learning, and also the increasing use of geospatial analytics, including in the insurance industry. We'll then move from the context and the theory and a few illustrations of the technology into a deeper dive on the specifics of the products that we've created, piloted last year and launched, and are very excited about this year around hurricane and around earthquake. I'll then hand over to Rupert, who'll dig into some specific use cases across our sort of 45 odd customers around the insurance industry so far. I would encourage you, it's a fairly intimate room, so there's certainly scope for asking questions. This is a workshop, so it's not designed to be a monologue, but you will have to take the microphone off me if you have a question, or I'll come to you. So let's do that piece about the new space, what we call revolution. And it's a revolution that hasn't happened overnight. It's been one that has accelerated over months and years, and is really accelerating now. It's really kind of enabled by a host of different technological advances, but the two that are probably most notable is that the payloads that we're trying to get into space for various applications have been enabled in miniaturization. So quite a lot of the technologies around communication or around observation are now just frankly way smaller than they used to be, which makes them lighter, which means that they can be deployed on a smaller space vehicle, which makes launch and which makes manufacture and launch way cheaper. Alongside that miniaturization and much more affordable technology in the vehicles, there is also much more privately sponsored launch capacity. So those two factors together, there are other technological factors as well, but those two factors together have enabled us to get to a count of something like 12,000 different shapes and sizes of orbiting spacecraft at various different altitudes, doing various different things. People talk about space getting cluttered. That is becoming a bit of a factor, but at the same time, space is really big, and they are quite well distributed in terms of altitude. I've illustrated here the difference between, for one particular technology, which is the one that we deploy, which is synthetic aperture radar. Bit of a mouthful, but everybody in this room will be an expert in this technology by the time they leave. The doors are locked. They're not locked. Should I have done a fire safety thing at the beginning? I've just kind of blown that. So the technology has come on really fast, and what used to be a technology that required a spacecraft about the size of a house, or at least a large motor car, is now the size of a refrigerator. that enables that launch that I described, the much greater affordability. And also the private sector has really grown in the space arena. And ISI is an example of that. I work for a 36-year-old technologist, fairly exhausting. I'm 57, so it's not for the faint-hearted. But his final year project in his master's was to develop miniaturized technology. And since then, we've raised a load of money and launched more than 50 of our own designed, manufactured and operated satellites. And the size of the constellation is fundamental to what we'll be describing today, because the insurance industry is used to having access to some sort of technology from space, be it sentinel images or other optical or other sensors. What's changed recently is just the coverage and what we call revisit, and the ability to get images of really high resolution, really high volume of images, pretty much when you want them, particularly if, like ISI, you own and operate the constellation yourself. For us, this illustration here is the tracks of our satellites passing over different parts of the globe. We now have a revisit. We have to update the slides pretty regularly because we've launched 14 satellites so far this year. We revisit at least 6 and up to 18 times a day over areas of interest, pretty much everywhere other than the polar caps. So let's get into that synthetic aperture radar education. This is what it looks like. You are here in the Fairmont Hotel. You can just about make out the rest of the Principality of Monaco. This was taken last week. So not today? Not today. If I wanted to take it today, I could take it any one of 15 to 18 times today. But then I'd have to get somebody to get it into the slides. That's the hardest bit. But that's sort of my point. So thank you for making it, which is the revisit here that we have would be enough to sort of track the Ferraris and the Rolls-Royce fleet that seems to be operating around this hotel. It's not easy on the eye. It's not a photograph. What the shades of grey or green, because it's being slightly colorized, are different scatter patterns from a signal that we send. So while it isn't pretty, what it is absolutely jammed, packed with data. So each of those different shades is actually a different direction of scatter from which we can infer things like the shapes of objects or the shapes of the terrain in which those objects are, or micro level changes, millimeter level changes in elevation or shape. Only if we really zoom in. We couldn't do it for the whole of Monaco in one go, but the capability is there. So the advantages when you turn this technology to catastrophes particularly are no daylight was involved in the production of this image. This is all reflection of a signal that we've sent. So we can do this day or night, hence part of the ability to get that kind of revisit. We can see through clouds, we can see through dust, and we can see through smoke. And we have another question, which is fantastic news.
Can you just talk a little bit more about the shades? So, I mean, I studied optics more time.
Right, that means I'm in significant trouble. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the shades? So you're saying that you can see the shape and probably see the elevation, and so how does it work?
I've got a picture later of wildfire where I'll show you what the destruction of a building looks like, and I've got a little illustration on there which will probably do a better job of it than me trying to illustrate with my arms. So let's come back to it, and if we don't come back to it, I'll show it to you in more detail afterwards. So I just want to make absolutely clear that this is not photography. This is an active signal that we send, we receive, we can interpret, and we can do that whatever the weather, wherever we're passing. So let me talk a little about hurricane. So the process that we go through around hurricane, we trialled this on Milton. I'll show you some images from that, as well as Helene last year and Tropical Cyclone Alfred around Australia. So we have a team of meteorologists who are actively thinking about where events might strike. We also have been taking pre-event images of the whole of the coastline of the United States that has exposure to Atlantic hurricane all the way up to Canada. So we've essentially got a high resolution 3 meter by 3 meter pixel image of the terrain and the buildings in that area ready for when an event makes landfall. We're constantly following the news around the hurricane season, like most people in Monte Carlo this week. When we see an event happen, we get very active. We monitor where landfall is expected to happen. We start to image just beforehand, and then when landfall happens, we send the satellites messages to capture as many images as possible of the area that has been impacted. We do that initially with these little strip maps, which are wider angle, larger area, slightly lower resolution, still quite high resolution. With this, we have 3 meter by 3 meter pixels. And then we also take what we call spot and dwell images, where the satellite takes 12 images as it goes, and we can get to 25 centimeter pixel resolution there. So that's where you're really focusing on, can I see what's happened to that individual building? Customers don't need to worry about all that, and that's part of the point of what we're doing here. What our customers receive for the hurricane event is a series of data layers. One layer is detection of change, inferring that there has been damage across that area, and I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. So there's a damage or change equals, we think, damage layer. We can't really tell you what it is, but we would expect it to be damage because we screen out things like car parks where vehicles might have been moved and things like that. And then we also provide a layer which is the flood extent and depth. So what our customers can do is see, where has there been change, where is there damage, where might that have been caused by flooding, where was there no flooding, therefore it's likely to be caused by the wind. And that is essentially the deliverable. And we focused on hurricane and cyclone because of the huge insured loss value, but also, of course, the much greater economic loss value. Our customers include a number of insurance companies, but also FEMA in the US. For these events, FEMA used our analysis of Helene and Milton for emergency response during those events. We also have NEMA, the Australian equivalent, using our data for floods in particular. I couldn't help but show, just to make the point about not worrying too much about the atmospheric conditions. If you use an optical satellite, this is what you'll see: clouds. The damage, the impact, the damage, the loss is happening underneath. I'm going backwards. Is happening underneath that. So let's look at the damage footprint. So you can't quite make out the fact that is Florida there. These shades of purple are level of change between a pre-image taken of the area and an image after landfall. The darker the purple, the greater the change, which you can assume is damage. We deliver that across the whole of the event at a 500 meter hexagrid level, which a few of our customers are used to receiving hexagrid as a sort of standard resolution format. That gives you a good indication of where has the impact been greatest at a sort of a block level rather than an individual property. We then are able to deliver a higher resolution raster. At the moment, we're working at 30 meter squares. And that gives you, again, the same sort of where is the change greatest, but at an individual plot level. So that, particularly if you've got a big structure, if you happen to be a baseball team with a structure like the Tropicana baseball stadium, you can see that a bit of the roof was still remaining after the event, and there was a bit that was unchanged in our analysis, and there was a high degree of change where the roof unfortunately blew off.
How you measure change? What is the number which changes the color?
Yes, it's a. I'm not capable of getting too technical about it, but it's the degree of change between the before and after image. And all we're doing is saying that there's a scale. So I couldn't tell you what the specific scale is, but it's how much does it not look like it looked before. We're not trying to quantify it.
For example, on the right-hand side in your Tampa picture, this more dark color, is it change in the height? Is it like...
It's all aspects of change that the SAR images can see when they first pass over. So it's not intended to replace high resolution aerial imagery that you could capture later on in the course of an event. What we're really doing is pointing to what sort of approximate degree of change can we see and where when we're looking at that sort of resolution.
That measure of change is your proprietary?
Yes, it's just our proprietary measure. Yeah.
How you translate that into the estimate for the customers?
We don't. We're purely about the data, because we derive this data from our analysis and we give it to people for different purposes. So for this event, we were delivering data to FEMA, to the state of Florida, to a number of counties within Florida. They're not interested in us trying to work out an insurance loss. We delivered it to a broker, reinsurance broker, and a number of primary insurance companies and MGAs, and we're not qualified to do the sums.
You explain to your customer how you do the math.
We'll, to a degree, yes, it is proprietary, but we'll open the kimono a little bit and say, here is roughly how we do it. Because we're always, if anybody's got a better way of doing it, we're interested, if that makes sense. So that's very much damage detection. What I've flipped to now is just the data that we're acquiring around flood. So these sort of rectangular shapes are the strip maps that I showed you earlier. So each one of those on this animation is one of 100 and something images that we took when Milton made landfall. The shading that you're seeing on the land there in Florida is our flood rapid impact product. So we don't need to do anything other than process the SAR imagery here to say, do we see water or not? And we can deliver that very quickly because it's all automated. We deliver it to our customers in 6 to 8 hours. And from that, you can basically see, is your portfolio exposed to areas that have been flooded? What we then do that takes us a little bit more time is to combine where we observe water with the terrain. So we consume digital terrain models and we say observed water here, terrain here, and we deduce the depth. So what you're seeing, albeit the resolution isn't great on the screen, what you're seeing there is, again, a bit of the west coast of Florida. The different shades of blue here are different depths of water. And what we've been able to do, and we regularly do, is to take those pixels and the depth, 3 meter by 3 meter depth, and combine that with building footprints to say what is the average depth around the individual buildings, which again enables our customers to overlay their portfolio and understand their exposure. And that's where we stop again. We're not going to then try and do the sums. We do have partners who will turn that data for their customers into a loss estimate, but we don't do that. So that is extent and depth. That takes us a little longer because there's actually a huge amount of work to do with the data. It takes us 24 hours to deliver that. The first release is 24 hours after landfall, and then we update it every 24 hours because unlike the wind damage, the water keeps moving. The hazard and the high water mark, which is what we're reporting here, can develop over time. So we keep reporting until it's done. We've had events in Australia and down the Murray River that take 20 odd days to complete. So it's quite a dynamic situation. That's actually, I'm cheating there because that's a picture from Helene, but I just wanted to show you how if you zoom in, you're really dealing with individual properties and their specific level of impact from the water. We've moved on recently to start to look at infrastructure as well as individual buildings. So what you're seeing here is a similar kind of analysis, but this time with roads and looking at what was the depth of water across individual pieces of the road infrastructure. This is not Tampa, this is Naples Airport. So you'll see at the high water mark, it'd be quite difficult to access Naples Airport from the west or from the south. You need to wait for the water to have cleared for that. Right, I'm going to flip on to wildfire because fire is important. You're going to ask a question there. No, go.
This tool, this way to assess, is it the way what the parametric insurance,
yes,
like AXA Climate, for example, they use?
Yes.
Do they use?
Yes, the analysis that I showed you here. So 3 parametric arrangements we're involved in that are public are, one of them's with AXA Climate, one's in Ghana, in Accra, and then another one in Nigeria, in Lagos, and we also have one in New York City as well. And it is this Flood Insights product with that high resolution view of water, no water, and the depth. And what in those arrangements we do is turn it into tiles, and the trigger is based on has water achieved a certain depth in those individual tiles. It's quite a strong basis for a parametric arrangement. It's very independent and it's observation and it's really fast. We're actually exploring some parametric arrangements now that rely on our wildfire damage detection. So this is binary, building destroyed or not destroyed, and it relies on the scatter pattern being different. When we send a signal and it hits a nice angular building, we get a nice sharp signal back. Where we hit buildings that have been destroyed and are essentially rubble, then we get a very dispersed, not clear signal in response. So this is a bit of our analysis of the LA fires. And what you're seeing here, the colorized areas are buildings that are still standing, and the ones that are light grey shaded is where we're really just looking at a pile of rubble because the fire's been through and taken those right out, unfortunately. And again, with this product for fire, we're able to do that analysis pretty quickly. For LA fires, to FEMA and other customers, including Aon, we were releasing on a 24-hour cycle. And the power of this is you can see through the smoke, again, day or night, and you can see in real time buildings being destroyed that you couldn't get close to on the ground. So there sorry.
Does this only work for housing, or does it also work for forest?
We haven't applied the wildfire analytics to forests yet. We are doing deforestation work in Brazil, where we're looking for suspicious deforestation. So we know we can see some canopies and see change, but actually what we found is different biomes have different response to the radar. So we haven't done that yet. We may well do it in the future, but at the moment we're trying to be clear on one product, which is building or no building thus far. I would say the technology's got the potential, but you'd have to train the model again. And so far we've trained wildfire for the US and for Australia for bushfire. We have done ad hoc analytics in wildfires in Greece and Spain and in France, but they're all a little bit rougher. So on hurricane, I hope I kind of got the message over there that what we're able to do is report on change, which equals damage, and water. I mentioned fire particularly because that is a component of what we're now doing with earthquake. So we trialed this with 2 customers in Japan last year, and there were 2 earthquakes, including one up there on the Noto Peninsula. And this is an optical imagery which was taken some time after. Actually, the sky was pretty clear and it was a fairly contained event, so it was quite straightforward to get an optical image. You can see an area here optically that has been heavily destroyed or heavily impacted. And that corresponds to where we detected the most change. Actually, that was an area where fire had followed the hurricane, had followed the earthquake damage, which is why the earthquake product that we have brought to market covers both of those. For this year, just before Monte Carlo, we launched the earthquake product in California. And as an input to that, we've spent time looking at the prediction of where in California is there higher likelihood of major events. And we now have our back catalogue, our archive of high-resolution data for the whole of California. So, we all hope there isn't an earthquake, but should there be one, then we'll be activating for that in the same way that we did for the 2 last year in Japan. And really, the cycle there, the process, I won't spend more of the time on the process, but the process is similar. Obviously, we can't really predict earthquakes in quite the same way, but we just have to respond really quickly. And we've done the pre-imaging so that we can be ready to go. Yes?
You also pick up buildings which are unstable.
Unstable buildings, if we were to zoom right in on one building, then we can see movement in buildings. We can see that from thermal expansion. We can see subsidence around buildings. But that particular use case requires us to zoom in on one building or a collection of buildings or a dam or a bridge. We're not really doing that for earthquake yet. For earthquake, what we're doing to make the best use of the constellation of satellites is to look at the whole of the event and give people that rapid understanding of the degree of impact and where, rather than try and do what you can do later with optical from space where the weather's good or from drones or whatever. Okay. Right, Rupert, I think the time has come for me to just finish off by saying, look, this is a difficult environment for insurers to deal with. Where these major catastrophes happen, if you put yourself in the shoes of the insurer, particularly, then they go from dealing with the sort of BAU level of claims to a situation in which they have, very little genuine intelligence as to what is happening on the ground, which means that they cannot be anything other really than reactive in communicating with their customers. When the customers start to inform the insurers of their claims, then they can quickly become overwhelmed by notifications of loss, which can have a wide range of severity and seriousness to them, but they all come in at the same time and cause an enormous bow wave of effort. That information isn't a strong basis for loss estimation. It's difficult to get a view of where has the impact been if you can't see across the event. And then in turn, it's hard to then really direct your field response loss adjuster assignment to those buildings and those cases that require the specialist attention, or scheduling of elements of the supply chain, or buying accommodation for customers who are clearly not going to go back into their homes. So without sort of big picture intel and then property level intel, it's a pretty difficult world to operate. So with that challenge in mind, okay, I should hand over to Rupert.
So I'm going to basically describe how MGAs, brokers, reinsurers are using the data that Stephen described from the perspective of how they support customers in the event of big events, claims and service, but also from the point of view of enhancing their CAT models, working with reinsurers, and working with regulators, their stakeholders, to be able to define the ultimate loss earlier than typically is the case. I hope you'll see that the insight we provide benefits all of the participants of the value chain. So from the distributing insurer right through to the reinsurers and even to the ILS type funds, etc. So our data basically, this is how I like to think of it. It allows you to pivot from a forecast view of an event to an observed what actually happened view of the event, well ahead of any claims arriving, or many at all, before aerial, before drones are able to fly. So for instance, in tropical cyclone Alfred, we basically delivered our first output within 6 hours of landfall. And just to bring home that that's not just a small output of the event, that's a massive output. So in the case of Helene, we captured 11,500 square miles within the first 24 hours, and we gave that to our customers. Milton, over 10,000. So today we've got over 40 insurers basically using our data to pivot from that moment of model prediction to something actually real. This is what has happened, and to use that to determine what their loss is. So just as a small aside, I won't get into too much detail, where an insurer or a reinsurer doesn't have good data, exposure data, we're also going to make it available that they are able to get an industry view estimation of the loss. So we will take in various different geographic zones, so whether hex grids or postcodes, zip codes, Cresta zones, county, whatever, and we will tell our customers how many buildings have been destroyed by the event, regardless of their own exposure. So they will be able to use that data as a sort of prime source of market sizing, market impact sizing. Okay, so most insurers will obviously will recognise there's not enough loss adjusters, salvage companies, temporary accommodation to go around when there's a big event, and there is, as we know, significant inflation associated with the provision of those services during an event. And if you are the insurer who is last to ask for those services, you will get the least best service, and you'll have to pay more for it. So, as we all know, in insurance, the longer a claim is outstanding, the more severe it becomes. This is a truism for 30 plus years. And this is the case in a catastrophe event as well. So if you are the insurer who is able to acquire, direct, and mobilize all those resources ahead of the other insurers, you are going to be in a better place to adjust your claims quicker and to put your customers back in the place where they need to be. We're particularly proud of our relationship with Suncorp, and you can see here is our data. This is our tropical cyclone Alfred data on the screen. And essentially what they do is they have all of their customers, they have all of their suppliers, all of their facilities, and all of their claims on a massive screen in a big facility in Brisbane, and they manage the event from that facility. And that facility is manned 24/7, and it has huge feeds of data coming in from different elements, including our data. Just a sort of slightly smaller scale type of example of the value of our data in Helene, one large tier one in Hartford-based insurer used our data to determine which of its customers had been most impacted and basically target the other customers for fast track settlement so they could deploy their in-house team to the most seriously impacted customers. And this led to improvement in the actual net loss or gross loss, should I say, but it also meant that their adjusters weren't actually burnt out, which is the first time ever in a large cat event. So if we go into the kind of the underwriting side of things, we've got over 370 flood events now recorded, and that data is available to insurers to buy to enhance and extend their existing flood models. And Stephen actually mentioned a bit earlier, we have one insurer in Australia that uses our data, the historic data, to refine and enhance the damage curves for the purposes of getting a better estimation of loss, but also for the purposes of underwriting and pricing. Okay, it's not working. So we flip it sort of kind of the relationship between the insurer and the reinsurer. We see, there are some circumstances where there is a contention within a reinsurance recovery. There's lack of clarity necessarily in some of the information provided. It's difficult necessarily to evidence your application, in which hours clause you're putting the claim. So our data is time and date stamped. So if there is any contention, we can provide, or we do provide, an independent, irrefutable source to cross-check that. And in some circumstances, if a claim is late reported, we have seen this in the UK, where customers have actually have been flooded and not known they've been flooded. I know that sounds hard to believe, but it is possible if the water goes in air bricks and such like. And then 3 or 4 months later, they put in a big claim. The insurers and the reinsurers assume that the loss has been settled, but actually it has to be reopened. So you can use the data to validate this is actually a legitimate claim that late in the game, but also you can use the data to proactively make sure all of the customers you think should have had a claim have actually considered whether they've had a claim or not. So particularly if buildings are unoccupied, people might be second homes and stuff, you can use the data to say, we think you've probably had a claim, can you just check, or can we take some steps to ensure that? So it's not a late and a more expensive claim reporting. And then I think we talked about in the LA wildfires, one heavily exposed insurer, local insurer, a big player in the market, had a significant amount of exposure. They knew that they were going to be struggling. They could not get boots on the ground because they weren't allowed beyond the fire line. They couldn't fly aerial or drones. The drones weren't able to fly because of the wind. The aerial wasn't able to fly because there were restrictions, and there was a continuation of smoke. So they used our data to incept their reinsurance recoveries. They did that on the Saturday. The fire started on the Wednesday. But such was the specificity of the data that we were able to acquire and the the validity of it, it was considered to be acceptable for the reinsurance purposes, working with one well-known reinsurance broker. And then slightly obscure perhaps, but we do see in some countries where there isn't that frequency of losses. There aren't that many cat events, fortunately, but there are certain circumstances when it occurs, and the local insurers don't necessarily have the expertise to handle the claims proactively. So they will work with their reinsurers. They may be in-house reinsurers in the case of Mapfre Re, or in this circumstance, or other reinsurers. And those reinsurers will provide some of the services to those insurers that we've talked about. But this is a situation which depends upon the country and the specific capability of the insurer itself. So we've got three. We provide data to three reinsurers who use it to support their cedents in event response. Okay. So I've gone through those small selection of use cases. Hopefully I've given you some food for thought. Have you any questions?
How you priced?
So, actually, I was expecting that conversation. Great. So we are, our costs are relatively fixed because we obviously have to launch the satellites. I know that the industry, particularly for catastrophe event, is focused on cost in the event of an event, and this is often a challenge that we face. The way we do it is we basically provide subscriptions based upon charge subscriptions based upon GWP and use cases. And we are very transparent about pricing, and so much so that we have a set of microsites that we make available to our prospect customers so that they can, and there's a calculator on there, and you can basically put in your GWP, put in your use cases, and you can just see how it all hangs together. And so in the US, you can add in hurricane, wildfire, earthquake, and then kind of the price calculation builds up from that. So that's a bit of a rabbit hole, but
First question is the satellite. It covers what is the dimension that's covered? One satellite. It's one country, two countries.
So 100 kilometers by 100 kilometer is the largest resolution image that we can take, but then we'll then change the aperture and we'll go to a much smaller area, but there'll be more detail on that image. Thank you very much for coming.
And thank you for all the questions. Much appreciated. Thank you.